really have never seen this much Canada-US politics really in almost 40 years. And even then, it was a Canadian internal debate about how friendly we get to the US. We've never had this kind of sparring with the US before, and it is disconcerting to many people. And I don't think Canada knows how to reply. Some Canadian politicians are trying to out tough guy Donald Trump, and I don't think that's going to work. Others are trying to ignore some of the more personal jibes. How does it look to you? Is this whole thing just some internet trolling by the president who's famous for giving his critics mean nicknames?
No, I think Trump is trying to bring Canada and Mexico onto the same page as the United States when it comes to fentanyl and other policies. I think he prefers to see himself as the leader of North America, not just of the United States. And he wants to confront the challenge of China, really speaking for the entire continent and not just the United States. It's not that he needs Canadian support necessarily, but I think there is a sense in the United States that Canada is off on its own direction with regard to China, at least under Justin Trudeau. So I think he's trying to bring everybody into step more than anything else. Yes, he also believes in tariffs economically. He believes that they're good for the economy, that they raise revenue and so forth. And once upon a time they did. But you'll find many economists today who point to some of the negative effects of tariffs and so forth. I think Trump is also determined to show that the United States can take more pain than any other country. So I don't think that any amount of retaliation is actually going to shake him from this course. It could damage American consumers, damage the American economy to some extent. And he, in a sense, is suggesting he's prepared to take some of that in order to win these trade battles, whether it's with Canada or China or Europe and so forth. So I think this is about Trump assuming a mantle of leadership economically, politically, geopolitically, militarily, and moving forward. He really is trying to redesign the world away from the chaos and the drift of the last couple of decades and take strategic control of places like Greenland, like the Cape of Good Hope and elsewhere, where he wants to do what China has been trying to do, which is to dominate the most important sea lanes and to dominate space and to dominate key strategic points. And so I think he wants Canada completely on board. And the irony is that even though it's a trade war, I think the things that Canada could do to avoid the trade war have nothing to do with trade or tariffs. They largely have to do with border enforcement and a kind of harmonization of diplomatic and military policies.
You know, I think a lot of what you said is right. And there's a moral hazard in negotiating with Justin Trudeau in that he's leaving in a week. So he can't make a deal, and he likes to go out as Captain Canada who stood up to Trump. That's a better way to end his sordid decade in the public square. And even his would-be successors, there's a race on in the Liberal Party to find a successor. And it'll likely be eco-banker Mark Carney, who used to be the head of the Bank of England, before that the head of the Bank of Canada. He's at the World Economic Forum. He was a director there. He was the United Nations ambassador for net zero. So he's sort of an Al Gore kind of figure.
He's sort of your central casting Canadian, basically.
Yeah, but
does he also drink Molson's and watch hockey, or what does he do?
But he sort of left Canada to make his fortune. He has an Irish passport and a Canadian passport. He was the chairman of Brookfield Asset Management, sort of a baby BlackRock. So he's sort of like an oligarch.
I know Brookfield, sure.
So anyhow, he's he'll.
Well, look, I mean, let me. It doesn't really matter. Everything you told me about this, you told me in the first sentence, which is that Justin Trudeau is leaving in a week. And I regret not being better informed about Canadian affairs. I knew he was leaving. I didn't know when. Now this all makes sense to me in a way it didn't before. So you can see the wheels turning on television here. But if Trump knows Trudeau is leaving, then of course Trump is going to pile on the punishment until Trudeau leaves. And then Trump is going to say that it's because of Trump that Trudeau left or quit or was thrown out. It's a win that he can portray as a win, even though it was happening anyway. That's how Trump does things. He sees opportunities for symbolic victories and he takes them. And so, in a sense, yes, I think the trade war will continue until Justin Trudeau leaves office. And then I think Trump will declare victory. And maybe both sides will be willing to compromise. Maybe the new Canadian government will come in and offer Trump some of what he's been asking for. But also, I think it's possible Trump might back off as long as he can claim victory from Trudeau. That would be my guess as to what would happen.
You know, I'm starting to feel that way because he put tariffs on about a month ago and then immediately took them off. And then he put them on a couple days ago and then immediately took them off. And I watch Howard Lutnick, his commerce secretary, who I think is he's smart. He's very close to the president. He talks about, he's really into international commerce. That's his title. That's his job. He was the head of Cantor Fitzgerald before this. And I think he lacks, I mean, he's got a lot of chutzpah. He's a larger than life personality, but he doesn't have some of the Trump drama. So I look to Lutnick as sort of a interpreter of what Trump is doing. And it's almost like Lutnick is saying, hey guys, it's going to be okay. We're just going through this because we need you to bend the knee a little bit more. Don't freak out. Like, I feel like when you listen to Trump, go hear what Lutnick has to say for what is actually going to happen. I mean, I don't doubt that the president is the boss, and I don't doubt that he has a certain goal, but I find it reassuring that a man who is in the business of business is his right-hand man. I'm not sure what to make of that, but I find like it's just tariffs on the auto sector really would work in Mexico because you bring the factory up to America. But in Ontario, our auto sector is right across the river from Detroit. And the same automobile is made on each side of the river. That vehicle goes back and forth. And so some of the biggest objectors to the tariffs were from Michigan. They were saying, you're actually sort of smashing us. And then the other major part of Canadian exports to the U.S., by far the largest, is oil. And the thing is, you can't move the oil sands to the United States through taxes. They just can't move them. So I feel like the tariff weapon, which could be used against China or Mexico in certain ways, I feel like it sort of doesn't fit in the Canada-U.S. context because, I mean, and by the way, last comment, who do you think owns Ford Canada, GM Canada? Who do you think owns half the oil sands companies? They're American companies on this side of the border anyways. So I feel like tariffs aren't even designed for our relationship. Am I being too, I don't know, too Pollyannish?
I think Canada could do very well in this whole confrontation by giving up certain things that don't really cost Canada anything to give up. I think the new incoming prime minister, if he's so inclined, if his World Economic Forum ties don't lead him in the wrong direction, I think he could make a far greater show of surging support to border enforcement, of working with Donald Trump on combating fentanyl. You know, Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, was on Fox News earlier this week, and he talked about how some of the fentanyl manufacturers are moving their pill factories to Canada. If that's true, it'd be great to see Canada cracking down on that. You know, give Trump the fentanyl enforcement that he wants and send the message that Canada is in this fight with him. And I would put it exactly that way. And then I think the response will be very warm. This really isn't about protecting American industries from Canada, although I will say that Trump's principle of reciprocity, that whatever Canada does in terms of tariffs or non-tariff barriers to trade, the United States is going to exact a similar price. I think that's very popular. I mean, even if it means there are some quote unquote retaliatory tariffs, I think that the principle of reciprocity is actually going to be very popular and very effective. And economists actually are okay with it as a means to generally lowering tariffs, because once you're going to get charged exactly what you charge others, then you might think twice about charging people or subsidizing industries, which are, those subsidies can be non-tariff barriers to trade. So I think it's relatively painless for Canada actually to bring this to an end. It just requires new leadership. Look, don't forget also, Trudeau is part of the international global elite that mocked Donald Trump. Literally, there were those open mic video moments recorded with Trudeau and Boris Johnson having a laugh at Trump's expense, just the way the Germans laughed at Trump's expense until Russia essentially ate their lunch. You know, I think it's just about leadership, and it's about telling Donald Trump and the American people that we respect your leadership now. Trudeau never respected, well, first of all, he never respected Canadians, I don't think, but I think he just couldn't find it in himself really to respect Donald Trump, except in this obsequious way, which didn't earn him any points with Americans. When he rushed down to Mar-a-Lago, it certainly didn't endear him to Canadians, but I don't think he won any appeal from the American public either. And that's why Trump continues to belittle him. He's the governor of Canada and so forth. I think Trump knows Canada is obviously a sovereign nation. It's a very large country, not easy to govern from Washington. The history of American efforts to take over Canada is a rather sad one. So, I mean, look, culturally, yes, and we've stolen all your comedians, but and so, some of your hockey players. But I think that the relationship's going to be excellent going forward. I just think that Canada needs to get on board on fentanyl and look on China in general. Canada has a different relationship with China. It's one I think that was far too close in previous years. It's one that became problematic with the arrest in China of Canadian citizens, the unjust arrest in retaliation for Canada helping the United States arrest a Chinese executive. I think that Canada and the United States have to be unified on China, and that includes fentanyl. Fentanyl comes from China. The components come from China. And I think once Trump senses that Canada is going to follow his leadership rather than try to act as a kind of alternative America, that's how Trudeau seems to us down here. Like he's the nicer version of whatever exists on the North American continent. He's not like those Americans. He believes in climate change and he likes Bollywood and he wears blackface or whatever it is he thinks will appeal to people. I mean, but he is in a sense playing a character role, Trudeau is or has done, which is that the Canadians are the nice Americans. American, I mean broadly in the North American sense, and it was common for a while among American backpackers during the Iraq War when Americans were getting accosted all across Europe. Americans would sew a Canadian flag on their backpacks so people would leave them alone because Canada does have that interpretation of being nicer than Americans. But I think that era of alternative identity or kind of using us as a foil for Canadian identity, I think that has to end. And it absolutely can without too much cost from Canada.